respondents accept PhilHealth. I'm Solicitor General Menardo Guevara, and with me this afternoon are Assistant Solicitor General George Ortha II, ASG Maria Victoria Sardilio, State Solicitor Rowena Mucha, and a host of other officials and solicitors from the OSG. Also with us this afternoon are DOF Secretary Ralph Recto and DOH Secretary Ted Herbosa, and officials from the Department of Finance, Department of Health, and the Department of Budget and Management. We are ready for the interpellation, Your Honor.
Appearance for PhilHealth.
Good afternoon, Your Honors. Solomon Armusura, Melissa Acorda, Susette Lopez, Yvette Perez, Joan Cristel, Emmanuel Descaliar, all from the Office of the Government Corporate Counsel, respectfully appearing for respondent PhilHealth, Your Honor. And if I also may mention, Your Honor, Secretaries Amena Pangandaman, Secretaries Bienvenido Laguesma, and Secretary Rex Lon Tigatialian, who are ex officio member of the PhilHealth Board, asked me to relay to the court their apologies for not being able to be here, but they are represented by DBM USEC Janet Abuel, Department of Labor and Employment USEC Warren Miklat, and DSWD Assistant Secretary Irene Dumlao. Thank you, Your Honors.
Thank you. For the record, we acknowledge the presence of the Amici Curay, former Secretary Margarito Tebes, Orville Solon, Sasha Nadine M. Suzara, and Mr. Sani Aplica. Thank you. Justice Alfredo Benjamin Caguiwa will commence his interpellation.
Thank you, Chief. Can I call the Solicitor General, please?
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon. At the outset, I wish to state that all of my questions seek to clarify a number of issues for my benefit, relating to aspects that affect this issue from the perspective of the executive, the budget, the allocation process, the relationship between agencies like PhilHealth and the DOF National Treasury. And in this way, our approach to this issue can be more informed and more robust, so to speak. So please indulge me if in the process, I reboot some of the discussions already had, okay?
Of course, Your Honor.
So that we are all on the same page, can we begin with Section 37 of the UHCA that is being flashed on the screen? And can I confirm from your end that said section provides for 6 sources of funding, namely sin tax collections, PAGCOR contributions, PCSO contributions, premium contributions, annual appropriations, and national government subsidies included in the GAA. Agreed?
Agreed, Your Honor.
So let me focus now on the sin taxes as a funding source. There are 4 relevant laws that we are talking about. I will flash them again on the screen. They are Republic Act 9334, Republic Act number 10351, Republic Act 11346, and Republic Act 11467. Do we agree on that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Based on the slide, you can see that Republic Act 9334 was enacted in 2004, 10351 in 2012, 11346 in 2019, and 11467 in 2020. Agreed?
Agreed, Your Honor.
Allow me to show you now the different provisions of those different laws and portions that I have highlighted. So let's begin with RA 9334. Under RA 9334, the sin taxes collected are expressly stated to be, and I quote, for the purpose of meeting and sustaining the goal of universal coverage of the National Health Insurance Program, or the NHIP. Agree?
Yes, Your Honor.
Under RA number 10351, the sin taxes collected, again, I quote, shall be allocated for the universal health care under the National Health Insurance Program. Yes?
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, under RA 11346, as amended by RA 11467, the sin taxes collected shall be, and I quote, allocated and used exclusively by PhilHealth for the implementation of the Universal Health Care Act, as shown here in Section 288A, Paragraph A, and Paragraph B, as well as Paragraph C and Paragraph D. My reading of the three laws that we just showed and the highlighted provisions is that a portion of the revenues from excise taxes on alcohol, tobacco, and sugar-sweetened beverages are earmarked exclusively for UHCA. Can we agree on that reading?
Just to be qualified, Your Honor.
How is it qualified?
We have to take a look at Section 37 as well.
All right, I will go there. But for the meantime, Mr. Solicitor General, can we agree that the language of these sin tax laws provide precisely for that? That they shall be used exclusively for UHCA.
Yes, Your Honor, for the implementation of the Universal Healthcare Act.
Yes, okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Let me now show you the next slide. This is the 2023 Sin Tax Annual Report. I believe that's prepared by the DOH. And for 2024, on the next slide, the Sin Tax Report. Can we agree, Mr. Solicitor General, that this money generated from the sin tax laws is money collected on a tax?
Yes, Your Honor.
Do we agree that it was levied for a special purpose, namely to fund the Universal Health Care Act?
Yes, Your Honor.
On the screen is the complete text of Article 6, Section 29(3) of the 1987 Constitution. And the plain language here is this: all money collected on any tax levied for a special purpose shall be treated as a special fund and paid out for such purpose only. I don't think you have any objections to that, right?
It is what it is.
That's
Your Honor.
right. You have, however, taken the position that Article 6, Section 29(3) of the Constitution there on the screen does not apply because of three main reasons. And let me show you what I understand to be your three main reasons. So first will be Section 44, Chapter 5, Book 4 of EO 292, which provides that all income shall accrue to the general fund, and I quote, unless otherwise specifically provided by law. The second ground is Section 10 of the Universal Health Care Act, which provides that, and I quote, and it is highlighted in the screen, for indirect contributors, premium subsidy shall be gradually adjusted and included annually in the GAA, and that, I quote again, the DOH, in coordination with PhilHealth, may request Congress to appropriate supplemental funding to meet targeted milestones. Correct?
Yes,
That's the
Your Honor.
second ground. The third ground will be Section 37 that you just mentioned, which provides that, it's there on the screen, the amount necessary to implement the provisions of this act shall be included in the GAA and shall be appropriated under the DOH and national government subsidy to PhilHealth. Those are the three main arguments I've discerned from your submissions. Am I correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. So let's go through each one. For EO 292, what is important to you is the phrase, and I quote, unless otherwise provided by law. And according to you, that phrase means that the taxing law must specifically say that the collection should go to a special account. Did I understand your argument correctly?
That is correct, Your Honor.
And your example is the Coconut Investment Fund under Republic Act 6260, particularly Section 8. I think that's flashed also in the screen, which says that the fees levied on the account farmer shall go to a special fund, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. At this point, with your indulgence, Solicitor General, can I ask Deputy Treasurer Marino to take the other podium?
Your Honor,
Good afternoon.
good afternoon.
You want to button your rope?
Sorry.
You have to lose weight, I think. Before anything else, can we clarify again what your position is? You are the Deputy Treasurer of the Bureau of Treasury
Yes, Your Honor.
and the representative of the DOF to the PhilHealth Board,
A secondary alternate. Yes, Your Honor.
a secondary alternate.
Yes, Your Honor.
As Deputy Treasurer of the BTR, you just heard what the Solicitor General explained. You agree with that position, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
And by virtue of Section 8, Republic Act 6260, how did the BTR or the Bureau of Treasury book the COCO levy funds?
Your Honor, okay. We did not book the COCO levy funds prior to 2012. So these COCO levy funds were not part of the books of the Treasury.
Understood. After 2012, how did you book them?
Okay. So first, Your Honor, when PCGG remitted the funds to the Treasury upon their successful conversion of the San Miguel shares, it was initially booked as a trust liability. And then upon the finality of the Supreme Court decision and the issuance of the EO back in 2015, 179 and 180, if I remember correctly,
That's correct.
it was booked as a special account in the general fund.
So it's a special account in the general fund.
Yes, because of those issuances, Your Honor.
Is it your position that a special account in the general fund, I'll refer to them as SAG-Fs, okay? Is it your position that the SAG-F will be created only if the law specifically says that the collection should go to a special account?
Yes, Your Honor.
That's following Section 8, 6260. Something like that, language to that effect.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Do you confirm that there are at least 60 SAG-F accounts in the books of the Bureau of Treasury?
At least 60, yes, Your Honor, as reflected in the table B15 of the BESF submitted along with the other budget documents.
All right.
But, Your Honor, if with your kind indulgence, the Treasury can submit a list that we are monitoring. There's more than what is reflected there.
Fantastic. So if you can submit that list, that will be great.
Yes, but Your Honor, with one caveat, all of the balances there are subject to ongoing reconciliation.
Understood.
With your indulgence. Thank you.
I'm showing now in the slides 10 SAG-Fs. First, for the fertilizer and pesticide program. Second, for the Mines and Geosciences Bureau. Third, the refund of input VAT. Fourth, are those from the BOQ, National Civil Aviation Security Committee, and HLURB. Another for the Seatbelt Use Fund. Then, for the Games and Amusement Board. Another one for the National Building Permit Collections and Remittances. And finally, for the Insurance Commission. In all of these SAG-Fs, they refer to laws that do not have language directing the creation of a special account. Can you confirm that?
I cannot confirm. I need to take a look at the
I can
laws.
assure you.
Okay.
I read those laws. They do not have that language. So going back to the phrase in EO 292, which says, and I quote, "unless otherwise specifically provided by law," isn't it more rational to interpret this phrase taking into consideration the entirety and purpose of the law in treating the funds as a special fund, instead of looking for language that specifically directs the creation of a special fund? And I ask this question in light of the 10 SAG-Fs I just identified, which do not have that language. Would you agree with me that that is a more rational way of understanding the phrase "unless otherwise provided by law"?
Your Honor, if with your kind indulgence, this provision, the Treasury reads this provision together with another succeeding section, Section 45.
That
If,
says what?
with your permission,
Sure.
may I read? Section 45, EO of the same EO, same book 6, Chapter 5, special fiduciary and trust funds. Receipts shall be recorded as income of special fiduciary or trust funds or funds other than the general fund only when authorized by law.
But those are trust funds. We're
Other-
referring to SAG-Fs.
The income of special fiduciary or trust funds, Your Honor.
So the income goes to a separate account?
There will be a ledger for them, Your Honor, and if it is authorized by law.
Okay. So essentially what you're saying is that additional section you just mentioned now fortifies your argument that there must be a specific language in the law,
Yes, Your Honor.
even if you have 10 SAG-F accounts that do not have that language.
Your Honor, again, we only establish the SAG-F ledgers whenever there is a provision in the law. Again, we beg your kind indulgence, but I do not have the specific provisions of the law in order to give you a more concrete answer, Your Honor.
That's okay.
My apologies.
That's okay. I'll go now to the second ground of the OSG, to argue that Article 6, Section 29(3) does not apply, and that is Section 10 of the UHCA. The slide shows the second paragraph of Section 10, and it reads as follows. Provided that for indirect contributors, premium subsidy shall be gradually adjusted and included annually in the GAA, provided further that the fund shall be released to PhilHealth, provided furthermore that the DOH, in coordination with PhilHealth, may request Congress to appropriate supplemental funding to meet targeted milestones of this act. Mr. Solicitor General, you refer to the first proviso as meaning that the syntax collections should go to the general fund and should be appropriated only through the GAA. Do I understand your argument correctly?
Yes, Your Honor.
In other words, from this first proviso, you conclude that Congress is given the discretion to determine the amounts to be appropriated for PhilHealth, correct?
Yes, Your Honor. I believe that that belongs to the discretionary power of Congress.
This is also your position when you rely on the last paragraph of Section 37, which says, it's there on the screen, the amount necessary to implement the provisions of this act shall be included in the GAA and shall be appropriated under the DOH and national government subsidy to PhilHealth. That, again, is basis for your position, correct?
Yes, Your Honor, because of three key words: necessary, shall be included in the GAA, and shall be appropriated by Congress.
So, to summarize, based on EO 292, Section 10 and 37 of the UHCA, it is your position that since an appropriation under the GAA is necessary, there is no special fund to speak of, correct?
Special fund in
As
a
described in Section 29.3.
special fund in a general sense, Your Honor, as a policy guideline for Congress to consider when they determine the amount that they will give to PhilHealth by way of subsidy. It's what we call a soft earmark.
So to you, it is still Congress that determines the amount to be appropriated or whether any amount should be appropriated at all, correct?
That's what Section 37 actually says, Your Honor.
And that is where I have problems with your reasoning. Because your interpretation of these provisions totally destroys the mandates of the sin tax laws and the Universal Health Care Act to deliver such funds to PhilHealth for the specific purpose of implementing the universal health care. I'm telling you, that's my problem.
I disagree, Your Honor.
Yes, understood. But the basic principle of statutory construction is to harmonize, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
To make laws consistent with other laws rather than having one considered repealed in favor of the other.
Exactly, Your Honor.
I'm showing you a slide. That is a quotation from the case of Philippine International Trading Corporation versus Commission on Audit. I underscore that portion. Thus, if diverse statutes relate to the same thing, they ought to be taken into consideration in construing any one of them, as it is an established rule of law that all acts in pari materia are to be taken together as if they were one law.
Yes, Your Honor, in pari materia.
So on the basis of this principle, I'm sharing my thoughts with you. I see sections 10 and 37, which you rely on, as provisions merely to trigger or regulate the release of the sin tax collections directly to PhilHealth. That's my take. I go to you, Mr. Marino. Let's go through the flow of money. After the taxes are levied, the BIR and the BOC remit the money to the National Treasury, correct?
That is correct.
And the National Treasury then puts it in the general fund, not even a SAG-F. That's
That is
correct? According to the 2023 Sin Tax Annual Report, it's there. 178.34 billion was earmarked for PhilHealth. Correct?
It's 83, Your Honor, if I'm reading the slide.
Now,
right.
178.34 for health.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Of that 178.34, the specific allocation for the premium subsidies for indirect contributors of PhilHealth is 83.90 billion. Do you confirm?
Yes, Your Honor.
However, despite being allocated 83.90 billion in sin taxes, the subsidy, which represents the premium payments for indirect contributors, amounts only to 79 billion, according to that. Agree?
Yes, Your Honor.
I call your attention now to the 2024 Sin Tax Annual Report. It was reported that 79 billion of sin taxes collected in 2022 was earmarked for PhilHealth. However, only 40.3 billion subsidy for the NHIP was reflected in the 2024 GAA. This means that around 39 billion of sin tax collections was not given to PhilHealth, correct?
Yes, under the GAA. Yes, Your Honor.
All right. So just to clarify, the figures you just saw in the 2023 Sin Tax Annual Report refer to collections from sin tax in 2021, correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
And the figures in 2024 Sin Tax Annual Report refer to collections from sin taxes in 2022, correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
And these syntax annual reports are based on the certifications issued by the BIR and the BOC and the total amounts collected from syntaxes, correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
I'm showing you in the next 5 slides examples of the BIR and BOC certifications. These were submitted in your submissions. These are the raw data from the BIR or the BOC, as the case may be, certifying their syntax collections for a fiscal year, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
And it is from these data that the percentage apportionment would then be done, correct?
That is correct.
And the apportionment is computed by the DBM, correct? Following DBM, DOF, DOH, PAGCOR, PCSO, PhilHealth Joint Circular Number 1, Series of 2022.
That is the provision in that circular. Yes, Your Honor.
All right. And this process, this money flow, is actually in accord with the last proviso of Section 288A of the NIRC, as amended by Section 14 of Republic Act 11346, where it says, provided further that the allocation for universal health care shall be based on the collection of the second fiscal year preceding the current fiscal year. Correct?
That's right, Your Honor.
This proviso, correct me if I'm wrong, provides for the appropriate reckoning point from which the allocations for health should be determined, correct?
For the syntax allocation,
Yes, for the syntax.
yes, Your
Yes.
Honor.
And the reckoning point is the actual collections of the second fiscal year preceding the current fiscal year, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, having computed the earmarked syntax collections for health, the next step is to give the allocation to the relevant agency, such as PhilHealth, correct?
It would have to be appropriated by Congress in the annual GAA, Your Honor.
The reason I went through this flow of money, again, I'm sharing with you my thoughts, is the way I see it, is that the syntax collections are still exclusively earmarked for the specific purpose of funding the UHCA, only that its release is done through the GAA, precisely because the process must be undertaken to determine the actual amount collected and the proper percentage allocation. And that brings me to my conclusion, that the provisions relied upon by the Solicitor General do not really give Congress any discretion to determine the amounts to be appropriated for PhilHealth. So my question to you is this: would you agree with me that this interpretation of mine harmonizes the provisos of Sections 10 and 37 of the UHCA with the undisputed fact that the syntax collections are meant to be solely used for implementing the UHCA?
Your Honor, I am not in a position to agree or disagree with the legal interpretation, but if I may share the historical experience when it comes to these earmarkings or appropriations.
Now,
Your
wait,
Hon-
hold on. Let me just continue with my questions. All right. I refer you to the second proviso of Section 10. There's a proviso there that says, provided further that the funds shall be released to PhilHealth. The funds collected shall be released to PhilHealth. In other words, if the syntax laws already determine the source and use of funds to implement the Universal Health Care Act, even if the funds pass through the GAA, their character as earmarked for a special purpose remains intact. Would you agree with my interpretation?
As a declaration of policy and priority, Your Honor, yes, if we interpret earmarks in such a manner.
All right, thank you. And doesn't my interpretation, again, I'm sure I'm very candid, I'm sharing my thoughts. Would you agree that my interpretation as to the allocation of the funds through the GAA, this aligns more with the constitutional requirement under Article 6, Section 29(3), that money collected on any tax levied for a special purpose shall be treated as a special fund and paid out only for such purpose. Don't you agree that my interpretation aligns more with that provision of the Constitution instead of undermining it?
Your Honor, again, my view is influenced by that provision in the EO 292 regarding the
Which is
meaning-
secondary to a constitutional edict, correct?
We understand, Your Honor.
Okay. Given all that we've discussed so far, can I go back to Article 6, Section 29(3)? We're talking plain language here. Can we all agree, Mr. Solicitor General, Mr. Marino, that the plain language of this provision is that if money is raised from levy of taxes for a specific purpose, then it shall be treated as a special fund. That is a directive of the Constitution. Can we agree at least on the plain meaning of that provision?
I guess we can, Your Honor.
Okay. Okay, before I leave this topic, can I, Mr. Marino, are you familiar with Treasury Circular number 4-2024? Defining a SAG-F.
2004, Your Honor.
2024, defining a SAG-F.
I am. Yes, Your Honor. Yes.
I'm flashing to you section 3.9. It defines a SAG-F. This is a Treasury Circular, okay? It defines a SAG-F as a fund whereby proceeds of specific revenue measures and grants earmarked by law for specific priority projects are recorded. This is the same definition as in the Unified Accounts Code Structure Manual. Are you familiar with that definition?
Yes, it is also the definition of the DBM in their glossary of terms, Your Honor.
And therefore, reading from that, if a specific revenue measure is earmarked, the word is earmarked, for a specific project, I refer to the Universal Health Care Act, it should be recorded as a SAG-F by definition, correct?
Again,
By
Your-
definition.
Again, Your Honor, this circular has to be reconciled with the section 45 of the Admin Code, Your Honor.
Understood. But by definition of your definition, I'm correct, am I not? It should be recorded as a SAG-F.
Your Honor, if I may, again, without section 45, then yes, I may agree. But we have to reckon with the provision of the Admin Code as well,
All right.
Your Honor.
I will digress. SAG-F is a special account in the general fund, correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
And in the last oral arguments, you admitted that special funds derived from sin taxes are commingled with all other funds of the government in the general fund.
Yes, Your Honor.
It's not even in a SAG-F, correct?
It is not in a SAG-F, Your Honor.
And therefore, in that scenario, the funds derived from sin taxes can be used for purposes other than that specified in the law because they are commingled in the general fund, correct?
The cash resources, Your Honor, are of course fungible.
Yes, pero pag
So-
inubos mo lahat, magagamit mo yan, di ba?
Pag inubos po lahat, Your Honor, we are obliged to raise resources in order to make sure that
Correct.
the
But
funds for the SAG-F.
but the funds that originally came from the sin tax laws are gone.
The specific cash, Your Honor,
They're
very
gone.
likely.
Yes.
Very likely. But again, funds are fungible, Your Honor.
Understood. Understood. Let me ask you as a Deputy Treasurer, don't you think there's something wrong about a special fund created by law for a special purpose that it can be used for purposes other than what it's used for, what it's supposed to be used for?
Your Honor, if we are to talk about the earmarking or SAG-Fs in general, then our interpretation is that these are accounting entries. These are accounting obligations.
That
And-
refer to actual monies that entered your pocket.
Yes, but the relevant comparison, if I may, Your Honor, the analogy that I will use is that of a bank account. So when we deposit our funds in a bank account, definitely there is cash going into that bank account. But we do not expect the bank to keep the cash in a vault or under the ground. We expect them to deploy the resources, but when we require any withdrawal, then we will be expecting the return or the balance that they have
All right.
indicated.
Understood.
So that is our interpretation.
But aside
Your
from the
Honor.
general fund, you have other funds, right? Trust funds.
Yes, Your Honor.
They're not commingled.
For the trust fund, they are carved out, Your Honor.
Completely.
Yes,
They cannot be touched.
they cannot be touched, Your Honor.
Correct?
Yes.
So why can't we treat funds derived from taxes for a special purpose in the same manner? You call it a SAG-F, but it's still commingled. Why can't we treat it that way?
Because, Your Honor, by its name, it is a special account within the general fund. Presidential Decree 1234, consolidated all of these special accounts outside the Treasury and then consolidated them as special accounts to be held by Treasury. So the very law that introduced the concept of a SAG-F
All right.
already
I'm not
implied
questioning the history. I'm familiar with PD 1234.
that. Yes, Your Honor.
My question is, in your opinion, would you agree that in order to preserve the special funds that are declared by law to be used only for a specific purpose, wouldn't it be better to set them aside from the general fund? Or even if you were to call them as a special account in the general fund, that we put guardrails so that they will not be used for a purpose other than what they were levied for? You see, the question is, they were levied for a specific purpose, and now it's being used for something else. Don't you think, since your Treasury, and maybe that will be part of the decision of the court, if we can put some guardrails there, because it doesn't make sense to me personally that a law specifically earmarks a fund for a specific purpose, and it goes into this well where it can disappear, which is not addressed by an answer that says, oh, we can always borrow funds.
Okay.
Yes.
May I, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Okay, with your permission. So, Your Honor, one of the regular positions adopted by the economic managers when it comes to their comments for appropriations bill or any basically earmarking of funds is to strongly discourage such practice. Because number one,
Yes.
it reduces the flexibility.
I understand.
And of course, from the point of view of the Treasury, to carve out those cash resources, to allow it to make it impossible for Treasury to use simply means that we need to borrow in order to pay for the other
Yes.
obligations. That would be, in this environment, more fiscally ruinous to the health of the
But
country.
that is the perception of the economic managers. I'm talking about a carve-out by law. Are the economic managers free from following this law?
The economic managers are obliged to follow the dictates
Exactly.
of the law, Your Honor.
And the law says this. Therefore, moving forward, should the court decide that these are special funds and they cannot be touched and they cannot be used for any purpose other than that, will the Bureau of Treasury comply?
Your Honor, if the court decrees it so, then we have no choice but to comply. But if I must highlight the implication, in the table B15 of the earmark revenues for SAG-F, DBM already highlighted a balance of 600 billion pesos or so. Internally, we have more when it comes to earmarks, SAG-F earmarks for that matter. If we are obliged or commanded to make sure that there is cash backing those earmarks at all times, then we will have to drastically bloat the borrowing program far above the levels that the economic managers or our international partners would deem fiscally credible, fiscally healthy.
Okay,
So,
so-
that, Your Honor.
Can I ask that you submit a memorandum on that issue? Because
Yes,
that's
Your Honor.
important to me.
Yes, Your
And
Honor.
what I want to see is whether or not doing so, what are the economic impacts of doing so?
Yes, Your
I
Honor.
think that is for a better informed judgment on our part.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Marino. You can take your seat. I'd like now to talk about Section 11, the most important section that has been discussed all throughout. And can we have that flashed on the screen? I'd like to talk about reserve funds. Okay. My first question, Mr. Solicitor General, refers to the first proviso. It says, provided that the total amount of reserves shall not exceed the ceiling equivalent to the amount actuarially estimated for 2 years projected program expenditures. That is the language, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
So it calls for an actuarial estimate. Am I correct that PhilHealth has an office of the actuary? There is, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
According to PhilHealth.
And I'm correct that it is headed by Ms. Yolanda De Leon? The office of the actuary. Nerissa De Leon is on top of her. The office of the actuary is Yolanda De Leon. Is she here? No, she's not. Yeah, can you come over? Yes, pero hindi siya head. Siya yung head ng actuary.
Last time she was not.
No, she's Nerissa San Jose. Yeah. I understand the policy.
Good afternoon, Your Honors.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You are? Can you state your name?
Yes, Your Honors. I am Nerissa Santiago. I am the Acting Senior Vice President of the Actuarial Services and Risk Management Sector, for which the Office of the Actuary is under, Your Honors.
It's under you.
Yes, Your Honors.
According to the CV of Ms. De Leon, since she's not here, which I will confirm with you, she has been with PhilHealth since 1999. Correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
And per her CV, she has a bachelor's degree in mathematics, a Master of Science in Applied Mathematics, major in Actuarial Science in 2007. Yes?
That's correct, Your Honor.
I looked at the scope based on her CV. She listed down her scope of duties. I think you will be familiar with them. They include, among others, if you can flash that on the screen. Number one, ensuring that appropriate protocols in statistical and actuarial analyses are employed by the department. Second, evaluating the reasonableness of projections, estimates regarding membership coverage, collections and benefit claim costs. Reviewing data, reporting findings, results derived by the department, and making the appropriate recommendations. Number four, if you can move the screen, helping determine company policy and explaining complex technical matters to company executives. 5, within the guidelines set, direct the preparation, review, consolidation, and recommendation. These are just some of her duties. I'm asking you now as her boss. You are her boss, right?
That's correct, Your Honor.
That these that these responsibilities are accurately described?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay, just for the record, I'm showing on the screen the organizational chart of PhilHealth. That is already you are Nerissa Santiago.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Below you would be the Office of the Actuary on the lower left bottom portion.
That's correct, Your Honor.
All right. In this Office of the Actuary, you have a number of officers, correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
They are called Senior Associate Actuary, Associate Actuary, Assistant Actuary, and Financial Analyst, correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Just for the benefit of all, I'm flashing on the screen the qualification standards of these officers, and I'd like to go through each one. Senior Associate Actuary must have a master's degree, preferably in the field of mathematics, actuarial science, statistics, or finance. For an Associate Actuary, bachelor's degree in the field of mathematics, actuarial science, statistics, or finance. For an Assistant Actuary or a Financial Analyst, bachelor's degree in actuarial science, statistics, or applied mathematics, or other related fields. Did I say that correctly?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Am I correct in saying that the actuarial estimates that appear in the financial statements of PhilHealth are prepared by these qualified individuals?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Now, going back to the text of Section 11, Miss
Nerissa Santiago.
Nerissa,
Yes.
you are familiar with Section 11.
Yes, Your Honor.
How long have you been in PhilHealth?
For almost 17 years, Your Honor.
All right. So you're familiar with how Section 11 operates?
Yes,
All right.
correct, Your Honor.
When Section 11 provides that the ceiling of the reserve funds can only be determined by an actuarial estimate, kayo yun, di ba?
Yes po, that's correct, Your Honor.
Okay. Let me refer you to page 54 to 55 of the 2023 audited financial statements of PhilHealth with the heading Reserve Funds. In item 26.1 of the notes to the FS, it says that the amount actuarially estimated for 2 years projected program expenditures is 560.55 billion pesos. Correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
In broad terms, in broad strokes, Nerissa,
Yes, Your Honor.
can you tell us how you came out with this estimate?
The estimate for the 560 billion is our estimate for the expenditures that will be spent, since this is as of December 31, 2023, that would be the expenditures for 2024 and 2025. So that will include the estimation for the benefit expense payouts and the operating expenditures.
Did you also consider the number of people who become qualified? What are the factors that you looked into?
Okay. For the benefit expense estimation, we rely on the benefit plan of the corporation for which this is being submitted to DPM as part of the requirement for the next 3 years. No? So the benefit plan will include the different benefit enhancements that will be done for the next 3 years. Okay. So the benefit plan will include if the benefit enhancement, for example, one of the benefit enhancements that was included in that estimate is the primary care benefit. For the primary care benefit, there is a target of the corporation for which the corporation will be able to cover in terms of primary care services the number of the population, the percentage of the population that will be covered. So.
And this is the
exactly.
process you follow every year?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chair. Your Honors.
And when DOF implemented special provision number 1D, it did not use the actuarial estimate, did it?
Yes,
It disregarded your amount.
it effectively, because of the DOF circular, I think this is as part of the, in compliance to the DOF circular that had been issued by the DOF. Mr.
Yes.
Chair, Your Honors.
I'm showing to you DOF's table of PhilHealth's 2-year actual expenditures in Philippine billions, which is page 8 of Annex A to the compliance of the OSG. Have you seen this table?
Yes, Your Honor.
Do you confirm that this table represents DOF's computation of the ceiling mentioned in Section 11?
Since the DOF is the one who issued the circular, then the calculation made by the DOF, I would presume, would be
Can I
in
ask the
accordance
Solicitor
with the-
General, can we agree that this is the DOF's computation of 2 years projected program expenditures?
No, Your Honor.
This is not?
No.
What is
The
this?
computation by the Department of Finance was based on disbursements for the past 3 years.
I invite your
Not
attention
the
to the,
actuarial.
sorry, I invite your attention to the last paragraph. This also serves as a reasonable 2-year forward expenditure estimate because it represents the absorptive capacity of PhilHealth as an institution. The 2-year expenditure levels from 2018 to 2023 were relatively stable, almost unaffected by the COVID-19. This is the figures by which you arrived at 183.1 billion, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
And therefore, that is your approximation of the 2-year ceiling, correct?
I guess that is so, Your Honor.
So again, to repeat, this is your computation of the ceiling in Section 11, correct? I see Senator Rector nodding his head. Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. And in arriving at that, Ms. Nerissa, when you arrived at your figure, or when you look at the figure of DOF, this is a simple addition of actual expenses of 2018 to 2023 divided by 5. This is not an actuarial estimate,
That's correct, Your Honor.
correct?
Yes po.
And the law says what is required is not an average of costs. What is required is an actuarial estimate, correct?
Yes, Your Honor, but may I, the way I understand the Section 11 is that the actuarially estimated 2-year program expenditure projected is the ceiling.
Correct.
Yes, sir.
But they
Your
reduced
Honor.
the ceiling because they used their own formula, which I am now saying is not an actuarial formula. Is it?
Yes, Your
It is not.
Yes, Your Honor.
It is a straightforward getting the average of expenses for 5 years divided by 5 to come up with an average.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Are we in agreement, Mr. Solicitor General?
Yes, Your Honor, because Section 11 provides for a ceiling, so
Yes.
any amount can be less than the ceiling.
That's where we disagree. It says actuarial estimate. And the actuarial
Yeah,
estimate
for the ceiling.
given
For
by
the ceiling.
Yes. She gave an actuarial estimate for the ceiling. How much was that? 500?
560, Your Honor.
And your estimate is almost half, 200. Correct?
281, Your Honor, to
Correct.
be exact.
So my point, my question to the Solicitor General is, not using the actuarial figures for arriving at the ceiling violates Section 11, correct? That's what
Sorry.
Section 11 says.
Yes, Your Honor, but if Section 11 speaks of a ceiling, then it goes to show that the reserve fund may actually be at a lower level. And that's what exactly DOF
I'm not disputing that. I'm not disputing that. What I'm saying is that in computing the ceiling, you disregarded the actuarial estimate and imposed your own. Am I wrong in that?
Well, it seems that that
seems
was
that
the
I'm right.
manner that the DOF computed the
Yes.
ceiling. But again, the amount that would have to be remitted was based on a different formula.
I'm not yet there. If, Ms. Nerissa, if PhilHealth's total reserve funds as of 2023 is only 464 billion, then it has not reached the ceiling of 560.55 billion, correct?
Yes, Your Honor. If it is compared to the 560, then it has not reached the ceiling,
All
Your
right.
Honor.
I again invite your attention to the highlighted portion of Section 11. If that can be flashed on the screen. The second paragraph. Provided further that whenever the actual reserves exceed the required ceiling at the end of the fiscal year, the excess of the PhilHealth Reserve Fund shall be used to increase the program's benefits and to decrease the amount of members' contributions. My reading is that once we reach the ceiling of 2 years projected program expenditures, that triggers two scenarios. Increase the program's benefits, decrease the amount of members' contributions. Since you've been so familiar with Section 11, do you agree with my reading of this one?
Yes, Your Honor.
In fact, in the second paragraph of Section 11, it states there that any unused portion of the reserve fund that is not needed to meet the current expenditure obligations or support the aforementioned programs shall be placed in investments. I understand that to mean that until and unless the ceiling is reached, the reserve funds shall be placed in investments, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Can PhilHealth accumulate as much reserve funds as it wants?
It is limited to the ceiling, Your Honor.
Yes. The moment it reaches the ceiling, it triggers those two obligations, correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
But until it reaches the ceiling, the mandate of Section 11 to PhilHealth is to continue maintaining and accumulating these reserve funds, correct?
That's as stated in the Section 11, Your Honor.
And the reason, the way I divine the reason, is for PhilHealth to gradually accumulate enough reserve funds to reach the actuarially estimated ceiling, correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
So when the reserve funds exceed the ceiling, again, to repeat, to belabor the point, Section 11 mandates that the excess shall be used to increase benefits and increase the amount of contributions, decrease the amount of contributions, correct?
That's the way I understand it,
Yes.
Your Honor.
So if PhilHealth's reserve funds remain below the ceiling, its obligation under Section 11 does not kick in.
Under Section 11, yes, Your
Yes.
Honor.
Section 11 also mandates, as you admitted earlier, that you would invest the reserve funds that are not needed to meet the current expenditures, correct?
Yes, as stated in the Section 11, Your Honor.
Okay. Can we go to the financial statement of PhilHealth's total reserve funds as of December 31, 2023? I see 464 billion as the reserve fund in 2023. Can you confirm that?
Yes, Your Honor.
On page 54 of PhilHealth's 2023 financial statements, can you flash the next slide? It is stated there that the ceiling or the amount actuarially estimated for 2 years projected program expenditures is 560.55. Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
So since PhilHealth has not reached the ceiling at this time, legally, and if we follow the language of Section 11, no portion of its reserve funds can be used to increase benefits and decrease the amount of contributions, correct?
That's correct, Your Honor, as stated in the Section 11.
And since it cannot use, it has to invest.
Yes, Your
That's
Honor.
the mandate.
Yes, Your Honor.
And that's exactly what PhilHealth has been doing, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
In fact, based on PhilHealth's 2023 financial statements, it has investments in time deposits amounting to 135 billion and investment securities of 336 billion, correct? That's the financial statements of PhilHealth.
That's correct, Your Honor.
And these investments generate interest income.
That's correct, Your Honor.
And of its reported income of 174 billion in 2023, PhilHealth generated around 20 billion pesos by way of interest income, correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
So I guess where I'm going is that these reserve funds are actually not idle, are they?
That's correct, Your Honor.
They are earning income, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, drawing you back to DOF's computation of the 2 years projected program expenditures, if that were the ceiling, which is 280.6 billion, then it means that the ceiling has been reached
That's correct, Your
because
Honor.
reserve funds is at 464 billion, correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
And, sorry, thank you, Marisa. I will continue with Mr. Solicitor General.
Yes.
So this difference, Mr. Solicitor General, between the reserve funds and the DOF computation of 2 years is 183.1 billion.
Yes, Your Honor.
And that's what you call a fund balance, correct?
Fund balance.
Yes. The 89.9 billion that was taken from this.
Yes, from the 183 billion.
Okay.
Your Honor.
Now let's go to PhilHealth's financial statement for calendar years 2020 to 2023. Before any adjustment by the DOF, all of the money not needed for the current year's expenditures were actually placed by PhilHealth in the reserve fund. Correct?
Seems to be the case, Your Honor, but I'm not counsel for PhilHealth, Your Honor.
But you are counsel for DOF.
Oh, yes, Your Honor.
I'm showing you a screenshot of page 64 of PhilHealth's 2023 financial statement under the title Other Significant and Relevant Information. It is there stated that by virtue of special provision number 1D, the management took actions, and I quote, in order to comply with the said directive. Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
And one of those actions was the reduction of 183.1 billion of the reserve fund and its transfer to the surplus fund, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
So based on all of these, do you confirm that the 183.1 billion fund balance, as you call it, was originally part of the reserve funds? That's where it came from.
May I confer
Please.
for a second? Your Honor, as far as DOF is concerned, that is part of the accumulated revenues, but not necessarily of the
No, but I
reserve
just
fund.
showed you the table. The money came from the reserve fund. And it got transferred to the surplus fund by virtue of Section 1D. When PhilHealth management decided to comply with Section 1D, it transferred 183.1 billion from the reserve fund to the surplus account.
Your Honor, there was a process before that because the initial step that has to be taken is to reduce the amount of the reserve fund to a reasonable level, taking into account the disbursements for the past several years.
So what you did was you had your own computation of what the reserve fund should be, and based on that amount, you took the difference and said that that difference should not be in the reserve fund,